there's kind of a negative bias to how employees approach their work. And I think that's by and large because the companies aren't providing clarity to the employee about their role. And now that doesn't necessarily mean that the company's got to come to them and say, here's how you do your job, right? I think it's the opposite. I think it's the company comes to them and says, okay, I want to provide you more clarity. How can I do that? What are the parts that are unclear? All right. Welcome back to Expandable. Good morning.
Good morning. It's cold here.
Yeah, a little bit. Got a great topic for the audience today. And I think that everyone who's in business has to deal with this.
All right. What is it?
How to get employees to own their roles.
Wow. When you find the answer, let me know. No.
Well,
so much of that I think is within their original personalities too, though.
There is personality involved for sure. I do agree with that.
That's one that is hard to teach.
Yeah. I think that it's personally, I come at it from more of an operational or structural perspective.
Okay.
And I think that the large majority of getting people to own what they do is through clarity. Okay. So the more clearer they can be about their role, the more everything sort of falls in place. And
and then there's a lot of factors that come into it too, because I've had over the years people that have owned the areas, but then others around, if they don't own the area, then it's very infectious. Exactly. And then that spreads very quickly.
So practically, I think what this looks like is bringing as much clarity as possible to the actual role itself. Not only the description of what you do and your title and the place that you sit in the company. So understanding your place in the org chart. So that's a bigger picture. So people see where they are and they see where they can go.
But there's a lot of executive roles where there's not clarity, where they have.
That's true. But they
have a goal, but there's no clarity.
I think
they've got to get there on their own way.
Sure. But then when you dial into that, I think the procedural part of, so let's come back to executives for the procedural part of most people's jobs helps to bring that employee uber clarity, because they can now know where their job starts and where it ends. And in light of other people, where they're picking it up from someone and where they're handing it off to someone else.
Sure.
So there should be an overlap on both ends there, where that's really what ownership looks like, in my opinion. When you're showing up and doing your job, if it's clear, here are the steps, or protocols, procedures, here's what we expect of you. Here's your kind of objectives for the month, quarter, year, whatever. Here's the whole role. And it's very clear as to what you're doing. Now you can hold that person accountable to all of those things, and what it looks like as you hand it off to someone inside the department, or what your department, hands off to the other department if you're a higher up role, and what you're picking up from someone else potentially. That's where the true ownership comes in, because you're thinking outside of your actual procedures. But I think in large part, employees don't have the clarity of what their actual role is to start.
That is very true.
So there's a gray area there.
And then I found myself over the years falling into that. There's one area of the organization that has, maybe it was clear years ago, but then, over the years and change of employees for, whatever reasons, there's, lack of clarity in the area.
And whenever there's lack of clarity, what naturally happens is the employees will make it up, and they'll do it to their best ability. And the employee may have great intentions, and they may be, a forthright ownership mentality. Like they already kind of have that built into the DNA, and that's great, because then the company, the leadership really didn't have to do anything to make that whole thing come together. But then there's the other side.
What about on the hiring process? What characteristics do you think that you can ask or talk to in an interview to find out if they have that ability?
Yeah.
That whatever process they're part of, they own, they want to get through it. They're going to think of everything that has to do with that project.
I think if you have clarity in a role, it makes it so much easier to ask the right questions of someone who would do that role, right? So when you're in an interview situation, you're very clear as to what this role is and the outcome it should achieve inside that department or the company as a whole. And so when you bring people into a conversation about those roles, you can ask questions that are very intelligent about the role as it pertains to their background. So the biggest question is, have you done this work? But if this work is not defined to the extent that you can talk about it in an interview, then that person is going to you're going to have a hard time asking the right questions to get to the real meat of the effectiveness of what they can do in that role. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay. Okay. Let me say it again.
I'm thinking of characteristic traits.
Yeah, sure.
Something like the Myers-Briggs, because, when you have an interview, so many people, they put on their good face. I mean, you only have so much time. You're looking at their history, how that corresponds with what they've done. And, okay, does it make sense? But for the most part, you got 90% of it is they're putting forth their best light and what they believe you want to know at that time.
I think
so. It's getting that 10% around of how do they actually operate?
Yeah. If you have a manager that's managing their team and they understand what makes that department function at its best, because they have all this sort of worked out, and they know that these roles, which roles exist for which purpose and how they work together. There's not a lack of clarity amongst the team about who's doing what for what purpose and how it affects everyone else. And when you're actually doing the work, that's what's going to spit out pretty quickly what makes you effective at it. So if you're doing this particular role and it requires Excel spreadsheets or Google Sheets, and you're in that tool, and you have to be able to create pivot tables in a certain way, because otherwise it makes that work so much worse. I mean, it makes it so much harder to do, and it takes longer, and it affects all these people. There's a negative cascade. If you know that for a fact, when you're interviewing someone, you can talk specifically about pivot tables. And then the efficacy of that role comes to light.
Okay.
Right? Because now you understand the role, understand what it's the purpose, all the things. You can go to the new candidate and say, okay, tell me about your background. I can see your resume, and it looks like we're kind of on the right track. And they can say a lot of fluffy, nice things. But if we get to the actual role, like a big thing in sales is, you basically don't want to hire a salesperson unless you know they can sell. So, a big thing is like you can talk about all these numbers and stuff that no one's really going to contest because no one knows they're on your resume, right? But let's do a trial and have you sit with our sales team and maybe make a few phone calls, or maybe go on a few.
I like the trials,
right? So when you come into the role in sort of a trial basis now, when it comes. We're getting a little off on tangent when we talk about hiring and interviewing and that kind of thing, because there's a whole kind of ecosystem around the good and bad of what you should or shouldn't do with people coming in or out of your organization. I say that I want to know that they can do the job, right? Like if you can say you can run a forklift, well, maybe you come in and run a forklift. You say you got the certification, but are you going to hit a propane tank? So it's kind of stuff like that. It's like, we know what this job entails because we've done the diligence of creating an effective role that is clear, and we know how to hold this person accountable. Yeah. Now, do you know how to do that? We're going to pull some things out of it and ask you.
Let me ask this. Now you've got an employee. You assume from the beginning they have the ownership mentality. Then they've been with us. They technically get the job done, but they really don't have that ownership mentality. It's never followed through. What do you do with that? It's not going to change.
I think it's the same thing. You have, but in a slightly different context. The front and back part, I think, is
everything's clear. They're they don't have that ownership.
The front and back part of it is the easiest way for me to explain ownership, because here's your job and you're getting paid to do this thing, but how it gets handed off to you and how you hand it off to someone else. Now there's other aspects of ownership, but this is the most clear, I think.
Yeah.
If you know what that role entails, there's clarity, and you can put your hands for the most part around. Some of it's subjective, but a lot of it's objective. The nature of how things get handed off to that role and how you hand them off. And you've watched people succeed in that role with an ownership mentality where they're thinking about the other team and they're looking, saying, hey, how can we help you to hand it off to us better? And you see those actions. almost to the point of documenting them where you can say, hey, we know what this looks like. Like Cheryl shows up and does her job really well, but she goes over and beyond because she's doing this and this. Now, when you go to interview someone, you can ask questions around, okay, let's say you're working in this role doing this thing. How would you manage someone handing off this, this job to you, and ask them how they would think about, because it might be the first time they've had to think about that, because a lot of companies don't really push to their employees to fully own their role because of what you're saying. There's kind of a negative bias to how employees approach their work. And I think that's by and large because the companies aren't providing clarity to the employee about their role. And now that doesn't necessarily mean that the company's got to come to them and say, here's how you do your job, right? I think it's the opposite. I think it's the company comes to them and says, okay, I want to provide you more clarity. How can I do that? What are the parts that are unclear?
Do I need to read it to you?
Right? Yeah. And then they will give you all the evidence you need to make it more clear. And since they were involved, they are owning more of the role. So if you ask them the question of what's unclear and they tell you, and then you help them to make it more clear, now you guys are both in it together. And I think the ownership level starts to get higher and higher. Now, of course, you're going to have certain personalities that just don't work. I mean, I don't mean to say this, but as the older you get, the more stuck in your ways you get. And, and that's a real thing. I mean, I'm getting older and I can tell there's certain things I don't want to change,
Less tolerant of.
Yeah. So there's lots of dynamics that play into all of this, but to have some kind of practical, foot to put forward, I think this is a really operationally sound way to approach employees owning their work and doing better work. It's funny, like I'm having this conversation with my son right now. He's 16 and, he's pretty mature for a 16-year-old boy, but he's also still a 16-year-old boy. Right.
Yeah.
And I see this duality of his identity or personality happening every day. It changes. And it's like, one day it's like super mature and we're like, you can just move out and have your own place. And the next day it's like,
oh man,
you're a complete idiot.
Yeah. And
so we've been kind of going through this, the last week or so with the highs and lows. And so, this is a lot of what I'm doing with him is saying, okay, me as a father, your leader, I have let you down because I thought that you were more mature than you really are. And that's dumb on my part because you're only 16. You're not 30. You're not 21.
Yeah, I'm starting to see that in areas.
Right?
My son is 13.
Yeah. But he's doing a lot of really good things too on his own. So how do we come together? Well, I need to come in and provide structure and clarity and help him have an organized, ordered life so that he doesn't spiral into these,
I've noticed my son, it's because, they get smarter real quick. There's a lot of aspects where they're way smarter than we were at that age.
Yes.
And then you're right. Sure. We're like, wait a second, he's still 13.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know that aspect, but you knew this.
And so you think it's the same, but it's not. It's almost like an equalizer, where you see it's like all over the chart. So I've been really talking to him a lot about the same kind of concepts of, you need to have order in your life, in effect, getting your house in order. He needs to get his life in order, and I'm giving him the tools to do that. So he doesn't, at the first glance, and this goes back to the negative employee, first glance, he's like, Rage Against the Machine, I'm a rat in the cage, right? Yeah. That's what he says. And I'm like,
I got to do these things. Yeah.
Okay. But discipline equals freedom.
Oh,
and he's like, no, it doesn't. And I'm like, okay, now that answer tells me where you're at.
Yeah.
Right. Because I am older and more wise in that way, knowing that I have said that over and over and over and over in my life and have not had the right outcome. But wisdom has showed me that is the answer. So I'm going to deploy what I know is true wisdom to you and give you that and say, okay, we're going to just take the smallest exercise. Long
you don't do this until you learn.
Exactly. I said, there's two paths. You can take this wisdom and deploy it, or you can not. and see where that gets you. And I can tell you where it gets you because I lived that life, and I'm trying to have you not live that life. So let's take the smallest, easiest, 1 day, 1 week exercise of what we can do to try this out and put that in place. We'll walk through that together. And then once we're done, we're going to look back and say, look, we did that. You did that. And does discipline equal freedom? And the answer is yes. Because when we get to the end of it, he's going to be like, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. He can see how it extrapolates.
I did well in the test.
Right?
And I was able to do this. Yeah.
But bringing this full circle, by giving him the tools and being in it with him, it given him clarity around what it is that is true. It showed him like, oh, okay, actually this does work. And I do want more of this. And I do see how I was, self-sabotaging. Okay, I want to keep going, and I want this to be in other parts of my life. And I want to try to do my best to make this my life. And I think it's the same thing with employees, that even the negative ones, some just aren't a good fit. But I think if you by and large have a good culture and have led well over the years, you can go to your employees and say, okay, I want to provide you, everything we can to make your work the best it can be for the best outcomes for the company and yourself. And when you start having that conversation, you will uncover things that naturally lead to them having sort of this light bulb moment of, this is the way. And, and honestly, if you're an owner listening to this and
I think we need to have a follow-up in a month and see how the progression.
Oh yeah. Well, I can give you a report because it's going to be documented. We're documenting all of it. But the big unlock of all this is once it starts to roll and pick up steam, the employees, in my son, in this case, they start to take ownership over themselves because they are empowered to live this new way.
Yeah.
And so now it becomes theirs fully, and they're it's not yours essentially. It's like, no, I actually know better than you about how this works because that's why it's working so well. And that's a big shift in how I think a lot of companies operate, where they kind of leave up to the employee, and the employee is like a good employee and already in their personal life takes ownership, then you're going to have a good situation. But if they don't, then you're going to end up kind of like a lot of gray areas, and they're going to point fingers at people. Yeah.
And that is a big key that I've kind of seen that people don't realize, over the years, I've had to interview I've had to be on the side of interviewing possible employees for every aspect of the bank, small, large, everywhere.
Yeah.
And one thing I've noticed is typically depending on how much your life is in order, is how your work life is going to be in order. It correlates.
That's right.
Translates.
Those who have their home life in order, then they'll probably have their work life in order. But if those who have their job and responsibilities in order, they're open and willing.
Those things you don't talk about during, a job interview, but people will just talk, and then they'll, I've got this. And you're like, they don't realize how. Yeah. Yeah.
But the more someone has their stuff together in terms of understanding the role, performing in the role and all of that, the more open they are to accountability. And so if someone comes in and asks questions about what they're doing, they're like, sure, I'll tell you everything you need to know. And actually, let me tell you some more things you probably didn't even think to ask the questions about. That's the best employee, because they've got their stuff together. They're thinking ahead about their work, versus someone who's like, why are you asking that question? And the only reason they're defensive, honestly, is because they don't have clarity for themselves. Because if they had clarity for themselves, they're open to answer questions, because what's the harm, unless there's some
there's something I don't
emergency
know.
or something.
So I think it's a good one.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to look at it, because it's very logical. It's objective. It's operational. You can build it in through your organization, and then to your point, hire from it, because now you're bringing in new employees with the same mentality. Like if you come in as an employee and you've been asked all these questions in the interview, you're already coming in day one thinking there's a high bar here, right? And you've worked with people that come with that level of intelligence and energy and that kind of thing. And you think, okay, when I'm working with this vendor or partner or whatever, I have to bring the A game, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, we've all had that. And I think that's the culture that companies need to build. They need to build one by one employees like that, where, outsiders look at it and say, wow, I got to really have my stuff together when I'm working with Surety, essentially, like are working with, Harvard Murray or Signal or wherever. Otherwise they're going to, they're basically going to show me the door because they're going somewhere. Right. And I want to be on that train.
Yeah.
And it's a, builds momentum behind the culture and the company and the vision and all of that. So, yeah.
It's a good one.
Cool. On to the next one.